Hello and welcome back to Will It Work. Today we're going to take another look at optical media and the iPhone. Now if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know this is something I've struggled with. In fact, last year I made a video where I documented all my attempts at making this work and then throwing in the towel and saying it wasn't possible. But we're back today because one of my viewers pointed out a device to me that I didn't know existed. This specific LiteOn USB CD DVD burner. Now what makes this drive special? Well, it's designed to work with smart TVs, and it has a mode that it can go into called Link to TV. So smart TVs like the iPhone, digital picture frames, and other consumer USB devices that can be a USB host are expecting the FAT file system for the most part. They're not going to read the file format of CD-ROMs and DVD-ROMs because it's only used in optical media, and there just really isn't much of an audience that wants to plug optical media into these devices. So this device definitely is for a niche market, but what it does basically is translate the file system of the optical disc to FAT32. And so when you plug it into a computer, it actually looks like a flash drive instead of an optical disc. And that's what I'm going to call it. I'm not going to call it Link to TV. I'm going to call it flash disk mode when we're talking about that versus regular mode when it acts like a regular CD-ROM or DVD-ROM. So normally in my videos when I connect these older devices, I just copy some files to it, connect it to the phone, and show that it works. But optical media is very different because we've got decades of different formats that have been used over the years at a retail level to distribute digital media. So in this video, we're going to be doing all retail optical media, and we'll do quite a few of them. We'll see what works and what doesn't work. We'll start off really simple and work our way up to more interesting things. So I have the device plugged into a powered hub here because the iPhone battery is not going to power this thing up. And I've got it into the Lightning to USB adapter here. So the first disc we're going to try is an ISO 9660 CD-ROM, which is the format you normally have for CD-ROM. On DVD-ROMs, you usually have UDF or Universal Disc format, and we'll get to those in a little bit. So this was a collection of DOS games I bought years and years ago, and it was spread out over several discs, and this particular one is the documentation disc, so it has all the user manuals in it for the various games. So let's open up the drive here, and we'll put the disc in. And I'll hold in the eject button for a couple minutes and you'll notice a green light come on the door here, and that means it's in flash drive mode. So let's put it in and see what happens. Now this is slower than normal because it has to translate all of this information into FAT32. There it is. Go in there. And the more data you have on the disk, the longer it takes to navigate the folders. We'll go into the PDF folder here. Obviously DVD-ROMs with more data are going to take longer to navigate. But this one's not too bad. Okay, so let's go into one of the directories here for one of the games, and we'll pull up the main PDF, and there is the instruction manual. Pretty cool. This is the first time we've gotten an optical data disk to work on the iPhone, and we can pull data off of it, no problem. Pretty cool. Okay, so what about an HFS Plus disk? Now I've talked about this in the past, how even though the iPhone can read HFS Plus drives, if you put an HFS Plus optical disk in, it won't work. So I was guessing that Apple's simply cutting it off at the subclass level. If it sees a device that's using the optical subclass of USB mass storage, it just doesn't work. But then as I later found out, when I had an internal DVD-ROM drive, a SATA drive that I connected to the iPhone with a SATA to USB adapter, and that used the SCSI subclass. It still didn't work with an HFS Plus disc. I even got a DVD-ROM disc, which if you're not familiar with, acts more like a traditional hard disk, and I formatted that in HFS Plus and it didn't work either. So obviously there's more going on here than just the subclass. And when I got this drive in, it kind of proved that point, because when you put it in flash drive mode, it will translate the disk into FAT32, but it also identifies to the host that it's a hard disk or a flash drive. If I plug this into my Mac, I don't get the disk icon anymore. I get the little generic icon for a hard drive or a jump drive. And when I check it with my utility software, it's still using the optical subclass. So there's more going on here than I understand. But for today, what we're going to experiment with is, can this drive translate an HFS Plus disk to FAT32 and also make it appear as a flash drive to the USB host? So let's take a look at that. So we're going to try macOS 10.3 Panther. This is an HFS Plus CD-ROM. And we got the little light on, so we're on flash disk mode. Let's put it in and see what happens. And there it spins down. Nothing happens. It won't work with an HFS Plus disk. This is not surprising to me because this is already a niche device. Like I mentioned earlier, and HFS Plus would be a niche format for a niche device. So not a surprise that this doesn't work. It is kind of a bummer though, because I really wanted to be able to put in an Apple branded optical disc and get it to work with the iPhone. But we might still have an option there. So now I'm going to pull out macOS 10.6 Snow Leopard. This is an HFS Plus DVD-ROM, but it's actually a hybrid disk. It has both an HFS Plus partition and an ISO 9660 partition as well that has Windows software on it. It has the Boot Camp software on it and the remote install software. So if you put this into a Mac, you get the HFS Plus partition. If you put it into Windows, you get the ISO partition. So what I'm curious, if we put a hybrid disk in this drive, will the firmware on this drive be able to deal with a hybrid disk and find the ISO partition, convert it to FAT32? So let's see what happens. It's thinking. Oh, there it is. Look at that. So let's open up the Windows portion of this disk. DVD-ROM drives are slower than CD-ROMs. Okay, so there we're in. Not much on here. Obviously, we're going to use on the iPhone. Maybe just some text files. But I think it is really neat that the firmware on this LiteOn drive is able to deal with a hybrid disk and find the ISO partition and mount it. So that alone, I think, is pretty cool. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is audiobook CDs. These are apparently still a thing, and you can buy them on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and other places as well. And normally they're like about 6 CDs long, but a lot of them have the option to purchase an MP3 CD version of it, like this one I got here. And this company, Blackstone, seems to be one of the larger ones that do MP3 CDs. They have the orange border on them. So let's see if this works, because essentially you go from 6 discs to 1. Now, what is an MP3 CD? Well, it's essentially just a data disc with MP3s on it, so in theory, this should work fine. All right, there it is. Okay, so essentially every chapter in the book is an MP3 file.
Unlike some celebrities who hide from the public's attention, Elvis believed he owed everything to his fans. During the 1950s, whenever a teenager was reported missing, the local Memphis police checked the front gates of Graceland.
Now, the Files app is really basic, so it's not going to play all those MP3s sequentially. So you should get an audio app out of the App Store if you're interested in this, and you would just copy them down or import them directly into the app, and then you could play them all in a playlist sequentially and listen to the book. But nice to know that that format works as well. Okay, so what about regular audio CDs? I mean, this is probably what most people think of when you mention CD. And I have here just a regular one, Ghostbusters 2 soundtrack from 1989. And my hope is that this device will present these audio tracks as WAV files to the USB hosts, because smart TVs can play WAV files. And WAV is just a wrapper for the PCM tracks from a CD. On the Macintosh side, it's wrapped in AIF. In fact, the Macintosh Finder automatically presents them as AIF files as soon as you put the disk in. So my hope is that this firmware in this drive will present them as WAV files, because smart TVs can play WAV, and that's what I'm really hoping for. So let's see if that works. So we got the green light on, so we're in flash drive mode. Nope, it doesn't do it. It does nothing with a traditional audio CD. That's disappointing. I had hopes that that might work. Okay, so the next CD audio format we're going to talk about is the enhanced CD. Now, these came out in the late 90s through the mid 2000s, and I would bet most people that own these didn't even realize they had an enhanced CD. And the gist of it was that in addition to being a regular audio CD, there was a data portion of the disc that contained music videos, interviews, pictures, and sometimes some Macromedia Flash programs that interacted with all that media. Now, I don't know if you can see it here, but there is a partition on the disc right around in here. And the outer edge is the data portion of the disc. And it is a hybrid, meaning that it has an HFS and a ISO side to it as well. And it also has data that's shared between the two sides. So for instance, most of the data on this disk is the music videos. And you don't really want to duplicate that on the HFS side and the ISO 9660 side. So the hybrid disks can share data as well as keep other data separate. So for instance, the QuickTime software for Macintosh only shows up on the HFS side, and the QuickTime software for Windows only shows up on the ISO side. But the data, the QuickTime files, which can be used by both, is shared in one location. And then the rest of the partition on the other side is just a regular audio CD. So this is about as complex as you can probably make a CD. So let's see if this drive can sort through all that, find the ISO portion, and mount it. Okay, there it is. Now the Files app can't play these old QuickTime files. It can only play like MPEG-4 files. And those old QuickTime movies had Sorensen codecs in them and Cinepac codecs in them. So we're going to have to turn to a third-party app in order to try and view those files. Now there's a lot of them on the App Store that'll do this, but we're just going to use one I like, 8Player Pro. And we will go into the Files app here. And there is Brittany disk. And under the source folder is the QuickTime movies. And let's try this out. Now I'm going to turn the volume down so we don't get a content hit, but we'll watch it. Yeah, everything works great. It plays perfectly fine. Okay. Let's take a look at one of the interviews. We shouldn't get a content hit on this, so I'll turn the volume back up.
The concept is like taking place at a school. It was kind of my idea also, and it takes place at a school, and the kids can't wait to get out of school, you know, then we all get out and we just like have a bunch of fun, and it's talking about...
Okay, so we can get into enhanced CDs. We can even play those old QuickTime movies. I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so let's look at another enhanced CD. I tried to find one that would be very cool to show off, and I read an article about this one, a band called Elephant, and what's cool about their enhanced CD is that the data portion of it contains a 1-for-1 MP3 for every audio track on the traditional CD side. So let's take a look at this. And the data side's just called MP3s. And there's a folder called Album that will contain all 10 tracks. Let's play one here. And it sounds pretty good. They're 256K rips, so not bad. And what else is cool is that there's actually a bonus 11th song on here called Eleanor, which is not on the traditional audio side. So despite maybe a slight decrease in fidelity for being MP3s, the data side of this disc is actually superior to the traditional audio side because you get an extra song on top of it. So a couple more things real quick. If you're interested at all in this album, don't make the same mistake I made, because there are two versions of it. There's a 2003 release and a 2004 release. And the 2003 release is the one that has the MP3s in the data portion. The 2004 is also an enhanced CD, but the only thing on the data portion of that disc is a little Macromedia Flash program, which takes you to websites that no longer exist. So the difference is the bold text here versus the cursive. And on the back, this one will say 2003 right here. This one says 2004. And this newer one also has Hollywood Records on it. So avoid that. This is the one you want. This is the good one. Also, both of these, 2003 and 2004, are still using HFS for the hybrid portion of the data partition. Even though HFS Plus had been out for years, I don't think there ever was an enhanced CD with HFS Plus, and there probably wasn't a reason to go to it back then, but if you're a Mac user, you may have noticed that under the last couple versions of the Mac OS, it can no longer read HFS discs anymore. It has to be HFS Plus. So if you have an enhanced CD from this time period, from the 90s or 2000s, you won't even be able to get into the data portion of it anymore in a Mac. You'd have to put it on an older flavor of the Mac OS, Windows, or you could put it in this drive and mount it as a flash disk in FAT32 and access the data that way. But something to keep in mind. Okay, so what about CD-ROMs from game consoles? Now, most of them had their own proprietary file system, but a few of them, most famously the PlayStation, just used ISO 9660. So I was fairly confident that we could get this to mount and be viewable on the iPhone, but what was going to be on it that we could pull up other than proprietary game-related files to the PlayStation 1? And I know on some Windows PC CD-ROM games, sometimes you could find the WAV files in them that the game used. So I did a little research on PlayStation 1 games to see if there was ever any kind of loose media files in there that the game itself would pull from. I couldn't find anything, but I did run across a really great story about Tiger Woods' 1999. So I don't know how much of the story is true or not, but I'll relay what I read. So game publishers a lot of times will put on a big fat dummy file, which is absolutely nothing, to fill out the space of the CD. Supposedly this helps with reducing the seek time of the laser when reading the data it needs to get to. And according to this story, right before this disc went to publication, somebody snuck onto it. Instead of a real dummy file, which is nothing, it's actually a QuickTime movie of the original South Park episode, the Jesus versus Santa one. And nobody noticed it for like a year or something. And the story goes that a mom bought this game for a kid thinking it was a PC game. He put it in his PC, started clicking on all the files, trying to get something to come up, and discovered this raunchy South Park episode. So naturally she called EA and complained. They pulled the game off the shelves, replaced it with one that actually had a real dummy file on it, which was nothing. And the rest is history. People actually try to find these. I think one of them was going for $35 on eBay. The guy guaranteed it was the Tiger Woods with the South Park episode on it, because the files apparently named the same between the recalled version and the original one. It's still called zzDummy.dat. So I was at this CD movie game exchange store. It's where I got the Britney Spears CD. And I went over to the PlayStation section and found the PlayStation 1 games. And there was maybe like 50 there. It wasn't a lot. And I'm going through it alphabetically. I'm like, all right, they got Tiger Woods. Of course, I have no idea to know if this disc is the original one with the South Park dummy file or if it's the recalled version. So let's find out. We'll open it up here. Now we're not going to be able to open up this type of file with the Files app, so we're going to go back into 8Player Pro. Okay, so there it is. No surprise there. It's just an ISO disc. Let's go in. All right, let's find. Oh, there it is. ZZ Dummy. Let's see what happens when we try to load it. There it is. And that's all I'm going to show of this video because we are family friendly here. But anyway, yeah, this is it. This is so cool. Not only are we able to mount and get around in a PlayStation 1 CD-ROM on the iPhone, but in this case, we found this Easter egg and can actually pull up the South Park video on it. Very, very neat. And now what you're all here for is, can you watch a DVD on your iPhone? Well, a DVD is just a UDF disc, so I was confident that it would mount with this special drive. And my gut feeling was it was not going to be able to play DVDs with copy protection on them. And that panned out. I had a couple of DVDs left that were bundled with their Blu-ray equivalent, and I tried both of them out and they did not work. And I also assumed that DVDs without copy protection would work, and that also was the case. So your smaller independent releases, documentaries, public domain films, things of that nature generally don't have copy protection on them. Copy protection, or the content scramble system, is not free and you have to pay for it. So a lot of publishers either don't care or can't afford it and just don't put it on. So it basically panned out like I thought it was going to be, and I was getting ready to film everything, and I was going to show off one of these non-copy protected independent releases. And then this movie came in that I ordered. And the reason I got this was I was going to show off another feature of DVDs, specifically ones from Hollywood movies that we wouldn't be able to play because of the copy protection, but some of them had DVD extras on them. Kind of like enhanced CDs, except they weren't in a separate partition. They were just in the root of the drive. Most of these DVD-ROM extras were Windows programs or links to interactive web pages that don't exist anymore, but occasionally there was some raw files on there. And someone in the collector community was telling me about this movie, the 2005 DVD of License to Drive. He said that had the screenplay as a PDF just sitting around in a folder on the root. And I was like, okay, cool. Well, then I'll show that off. I'll get this in, we'll pull up the PDF and show that there are, even on a Hollywood movie, something you can access from the disc. And that worked fine, and I pulled up the PDF and everything was fine. And just for grins, I went over into the Video TS folder, which is where all the VOB files are. And if you don't know, a DVD is broken down into VOB files, which are about 1 gigabyte each in size. It's not one big file for the movie. And I went in there with some third-party apps that can play VOB files, and I launched it, and it takes a couple minutes to come up because it has to translate everything. Like I mentioned earlier, the drive is really slow. The bigger you get, the more data, the more it has to translate, the slower it is. So I just kind of set it aside, went back to my computer. I was expecting it to come up in a couple minutes and fail. And all of a sudden I start hearing voices, and I look over at my phone and it's playing this movie. I'm like, what is going on? How is that possible? There's no way. This is a Hollywood release. And I take the drive back over to my iMac and do some testing with various software, and it is in fact missing copy protection. I'm like, what? This is crazy. I mean, it even says it right here on here that it has copy protection. The disc says it right here that it has copy protection on it, but it doesn't. I mean, this is a 20th Century Fox release, and Anchor Bay put out this disc, so someone here dropped the ball. Incredible. I mean, what are the odds of all the things I chose to get for a totally unrelated reason, and it works with the iPhone? So Let's pop it in and check it out. Now, as I was talking about, the more data on the disk, the longer it translates, time it takes to translate, and I'll tell you what, it takes about 3 minutes or so for the disk to mount on the phone, and a few more minutes to get in each folder as we drill down to the video TS folder. And I think it takes about 8 minutes basically to get into the video TS folder, as you have to wait for each level to come up. And did I mention this is not a practical way to watch a DVD, but just a technical demonstration? So anyway, I'm going to skip all that for you, and we'll just come back right when I'm inside the video TS folder, and then we'll take a look at pulling up a file and maybe watching a little clip from this movie. Okay, so we're in the video TS folder here with all the VOB files. That's the movie broken down into like 1 GB chunks. And let's try to play some of it. We'll move this over. We'll stand here. And I'm going to play just one of them here. That's still going to take about 1.5 minutes to come up. And the disc will speed up and sound like a jet airplane ready to take off. But it will come up eventually.
Is Les in, please?
Yeah, this is Les.
Hi, this is Mercedes.
Do you remember me? Remember you? Yeah, of course. Hi, how are you?
And you can scrub
Lonely.
different parts.
Right in, so let's start off with some light traffic.
So it works. Crazy as it sounds, this movie, License to Drive, didn't have any copy protection on it. So can you play DVDs on the iPhone? Well, if you can find them without copy protection, if you don't mind not having a menu system and going in and finding the VOB files and playing them individually, and if you don't mind the lag time, well, yes. But again, it's not very practical, but technically possible under certain circumstances. Okay, so for the last part of this video, we're going to talk about writing data to an optical drive. Now, I was 99.99% certain that this flash drive mode that this drive goes into is read-only. Why else would it be? It was designed for smart TVs. But just to be thorough, and I knew that some of you would ask, I went ahead and tried out some blank Cdr media. And of course, that doesn't work at all because a blank CDR is not an ISO or a UDF disk. It's just a blank disk, so nothing happens when you put it in the drive. I did create an ISO session on it, but didn't close it so that you could add data later to it, and that also did nothing. And after you close the session, which makes it permanently read only at that point, then it would work like a normal disk. So I thought the only way that this would be possible is with DVD-ROM, which I've talked about before in a previous video, and I mentioned it earlier in this video. And this was an optical disc that worked like a traditional hard drive. It has disk sectors. You can format it into any file system that the host operating system supports. You have read-write access to any file on it, so you can delete one file without having to erase the entire thing like a CDRW or DVD-RW. It's really cool tech, and one can only imagine if optical media had always worked this way, how much cooler the 90s would have been than what we had to deal with at the time. So I thought about formatting this in FAT32 just to see what it would happen, because you normally don't have a FAT32 disk to put in there. And then I could always, of course, put it into UDF, which I know it can read. And you still have all the advantages of DVD-RAM, even if you format it in UDF. Unfortunately, this drive doesn't support DVD-RAM. I thought it did when I bought it, but when I went back and read the specs, I realized it doesn't support it at all. You have to have special drives that can read DVD-RAM. So forget the flash drive mode. Even in regular mode, this thing can't work with DVD-RAM. So that pretty much sums up writing to optical media with this thing. It's just not going to work. It was all academic. It was never going to work, but I did want to try it just to be thorough. So anyway, we've come to the end of the video. This has been a very, very fun and interesting one to do because we've had so many different years of different formats to test out, all retail discs instead of me just dumping some data on an old drive and showing you that it works. I mean, this has been really fun to explore all this stuff and see what works. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please like and subscribe. I've got many more planned for 2021, but that's all for now. Take care.